There is a city in the Middle East where Mossad has never officially operated, where every street corner belongs to an organization that has spent 40 years perfecting the art of finding people who don't belong, where the counterintelligence apparatus doesn't use polygraphs or interrogation rooms. It uses dinner tables, wedding halls, mosques. It uses women who have known each other since childhood, who can tell within 3 conversations whether a newcomer's grief is real or rehearsed. Mossad sent a woman there anyway, not a soldier, not a technical operative. A woman trained to become someone else so completely that the lie would stop feeling like a lie and start feeling like memory. This is not a story about espionage as most people imagine it. There are no car chases, no dead drops in train station lockers, no moment where someone pulls a gun. This is a story about a hijab, a dead brother who never existed, and a community of women who trusted the wrong person for 2 years and never found out. Her name, for the purposes of this documentary, is Layla. That is not what her handler called her. It is not what the women in the Dahieh district of South Beirut came to know her as. It is a name chosen because names in this kind of work are tools. You pick one, you use it, you leave it behind when the mission is done. Layla was in her early 30s when the operation began. She had grown up speaking Arabic as a second language and had spent the better part of 3 years making it feel like a first one. Not formal Arabic, Lebanese Arabic, the kind with the softened letters and the coastal rhythm, the kind where the way you say a word tells people which neighborhood your grandmother was from. She had been chosen in part because she could hold grief in her face without producing it deliberately. That sounds like a strange criterion. In Beirut's Shia communities, especially in the Dahieh, the area that Hezbollah administers like a parallel state, grief is not a private emotion. It is a shared language. Everybody has lost someone. The 2006 war with Israel killed over 1,000 Lebanese civilians. In the south, in the Dahieh, almost every family had a story, a building, a cousin, a street that no longer looked the way it did before. If you arrived in that community without grief, you didn't belong. If your grief felt performed, they would know. Layla's legend gave her a dead brother, killed in 2006. Family from Tyre, displaced, now scattered. She had been living abroad, Germany, and had come back because she couldn't stay away any longer. She was devout, she was quiet, she wasn't looking for anything except to come home to something that felt like home. That was the cover. 3 years in the making. Memorized to a depth that most people will never have to go. And it almost didn't survive the 3rd week. The Dahieh is not, from the outside, what most people expect. It is dense and functional and loud in the way that any working-class urban district is loud, markets, children, the call to prayer 5 times a day, the smell of coffee from open windows. Hezbollah's presence is not uniformed soldiers on every corner. It is administrative, it is social. It is the school that your children attend, and the clinic that saw you through your last pregnancy and the welfare payment that came when your husband didn't come back from the south. Hezbollah runs a state within a state, and like any state, its security apparatus is not primarily military. It is communal. It is built on the understanding that a spy cannot survive in a community they don't genuinely belong to, because communities are not fooled by credentials. They are fooled or not fooled by presence, by whether you show up consistently, by whether you hold a neighbor's child the way someone holds a child they're comfortable around, by whether your prayers sound like habit or performance. The women's network inside Hezbollah's social infrastructure is not a formal intelligence unit. It has no name, but it functions as one. Women who have prayed together for 20 years notice things that no surveillance camera would catch. A new face that asks slightly too many questions. A woman who always arrives exactly on time because she has rehearsed the route, not because she knows it. A woman whose grief, when she talks about her dead brother, is technically accurate, but slightly too available. Layla had been trained for all of this. She knew the risks. What she had not been told, what no briefing document can actually prepare you for, is how ordinary the danger would feel once she was inside it. Her entry point into the community was not dramatic. She moved into a small apartment on a side street 3 blocks from a mosque she had been told was socially central to the families she needed to reach. She dressed simply. She kept consistent hours. She went to prayers not every day, that would have seemed eager, but consistently enough that faces began to register her. She waited to be approached. This was deliberate. In a community with functioning counterintelligence instincts, the person who introduces themselves first is the person who wants something. Layla wanted to look like someone who wanted nothing except to not be alone. 3 weeks in, a woman approached her after Friday prayers. Her name was Khalil, mid-50s. A widow, her husband had been a Hezbollah logistics officer, killed in the 2006 war. She was, by every measure of the community, its social center of gravity. She knew everyone. Everyone owed her a visit, a meal, an afternoon. When Khalil decided someone was trustworthy, the community took its cue from her. And the first thing Khalil said to Layla was not a greeting, it was a question. She asked which mosque Layla had attended in Germany. This is the kind of question a legend is supposed to survive. Layla had the answer ready. A specific mosque in Hamburg, its imam, its annual Ashura ceremonies. The name was real, the details were accurate. She had memorized them from a Mossad briefing document compiled from open sources and field research. What the briefing document had not captured was that Khalil's sister-in-law had lived in Hamburg for 11 years, that she visited every summer, that she knew the mosque personally, and that the imam Layla named had left the 6 months earlier. Khalil smiled. She didn't say anything. She asked a follow-up question about the new imam, the one who had replaced him. Layla didn't have that name. She gave an answer that was technically evasive. She said she had not attended regularly toward the end, that she was already preparing to leave, that the community had felt different after the imam left, and Khalil nodded and said she understood. Transitions are hard, change is hard, coming back is hard. She invited Layla for coffee the following week. Layla accepted. She walked home through streets she had studied on maps for 2 years and felt, for the first time, what the next 18 months were actually going to require of her. Not the Arabic, not the theology, not the fabricated genealogy of a family that didn't exist. The thing that no training can replicate. The ability to sit across from someone who is quietly deciding whether you are real and make yourself real enough, in that moment, to survive the next question. She didn't know yet that Khalil had a son. She didn't know yet that the son worked in Hezbollah's administrative structure. She didn't know yet that he had noticed her from across the courtyard that morning, and had already, by the time his mother extended the coffee invitation, begun asking questions of his own. The cover was 3 weeks old. It had already shown its first crack. And the person with the most power to destroy it had just invited her into her home. The coffee at Khalil's apartment happened on a Thursday afternoon. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of cardamom and old concrete. The walls had photographs, sons, a wedding, a man in a frame with a black ribbon in the corner. Khalil moved through her kitchen the way women move through spaces they have owned for decades, without looking at what her hands were doing, talking the whole time. She talked about her husband, about the neighborhood before 2006, about how the street outside used to have a bakery that made a specific kind of bread that nobody makes anymore. She talked about her grandchildren. She talked about Germany. She had visited once, she said, for medical treatment. She found it cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Layla sat and listened and drank the coffee and said the right things at the right moments. She mentioned her brother once, briefly, the way someone mentions a wound they have learned to carry without displaying. Khalil looked at her when she said it, not with suspicion, with recognition. By the end of the afternoon, Khalil had introduced her to 2 other women who had stopped by. This was not accidental. Layla understood that immediately it was an audition with an audience she hadn't been told about. She passed it. She was invited back the following week. Walking home, she composed her field report in her head. Contact established. Social entry achieved. No active suspicion detected. She believed, at that point, that the Hamburg inconsistency had been absorbed, that Khalil had accepted the explanation, or decided the discrepancy was too small to matter. She was wrong about what Khalil had decided. She just didn't know it yet. The son's name was Abbas. Layla first registered him properly about 6 weeks into the operation, not because he introduced himself, but because she noticed he was consistently present at the edge of gatherings without participating in them. A man in his late 30s, solidly built, with the particular stillness of someone who has been trained to watch without appearing to watch. He worked, as she would learn through careful lateral inquiry over the following weeks, in what Hezbollah describes as administrative coordination, a designation that covers a range of functions, some of them logistical, some of them related to the kind of internal verification that organizations built on secrecy require constantly. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of person Layla needed to stay invisible to. The first time he spoke to her directly, he complimented her Arabic. He said it in a tone that was entirely neutral, the way you might compliment someone's Arabic to tell them it's very good, or to tell them it's very good for someone who learned it somewhere else. Layla thanked him. She said she had worked hard at it. She left it there. He nodded and moved away. She finished her tea and did not let her breathing change. By month 4, the operation had developed a functional rhythm. Layla had become a consistent presence in Khalil's circle, the wider network of women who orbited the older woman's apartment. Her opinions, her judgments about people. She attended a birth. She helped prepare food for a funeral. She was trusted with small errands, carrying a message between households, helping a younger woman draft formal correspondence, watching a neighbor's children for an afternoon. None of these tasks were intelligence operations in any conventional sense. They were the slow accumulation of being known, of being woven into the fabric of daily life at a granular enough level that her presence stopped being notable and became simply part of the texture of the neighborhood. And in that texture, information moved, not secrets passed in envelopes. Conversation. A woman mentioning that her husband had been called to a meeting in the South at short notice. Another woman noting that a building 3 streets over had vehicles parked outside it for 3 nights running, men she didn't recognize carrying things inside. A mother worrying aloud that her son's unit had been repositioned. She didn't know where, he couldn't say, but he had asked her to keep his winter coat ready. Layla listened. She remembered. She reported. She did not think during those months about what the reports were building toward. This is something that deep cover operatives describe consistently in the limited accounts that exist. The operational present consumes the moral future. You are too focused on surviving the next conversation to examine what the conversation is for. Abbas asked his first direct question in month 5. He asked it at his mother's apartment during an evening gathering, positioned as casual. He mentioned that he had family connections in Tyre, that his mother's cousin had lived near the neighborhood Layla's legend placed her family. He mentioned a street name. Layla recognized the name. It was in the legend. She confirmed it. He mentioned a secondary street, also in the legend. She confirmed that too. Then he mentioned a school, a specific primary school, asking if she had attended it. The school was not in the legend. It was a real school. It existed. But Layla's briefing had not included it because the briefing had been built around the main landmarks of the neighborhood, not its educational infrastructure. It was a gap that nobody had anticipated because nobody had anticipated someone testing this specific geography at this specific depth. She said she hadn't. Her family had sent her to a school closer to her grandmother's side of the neighborhood. She named a different school that she knew existed in Tyre from her preparation. She said it with the mild defensiveness of someone who finds it slightly strange to be asked about primary school geography. Abbas nodded. He moved on. But that night, Layla sent a signal to her handler that did not use the routine channel. It used the secondary one, the one reserved for elevated risk. The response took 22 hours. In those 22 hours, she attended a morning gathering, helped Khalil sort through donated clothing for a community drive, and had a 40-minute conversation with a woman whose husband commanded a Hezbollah logistics unit in the southern suburbs. She took mental notes on everything the woman said. She laughed at the right moments. She said almost nothing about herself. When the response came, it contained two things. The first was a patch for the legend, a constructed explanation for the school discrepancy. A plausible reason why a child from that area might have attended a school in an adjacent district with enough verifiable local detail that it would hold under moderate scrutiny. The second was a question she had not been asked before. Her handler asked her to assess, on a scale she had been trained to use, whether Abbas represented a containable risk or a structural threat to the operation. This was not a question about Abbas. It was a question about whether the operation should continue. Layla sat with that question for 2 days before she answered it. This is the part of deep cover work that the operational reports do not capture adequately. The assessment is not purely analytical. It cannot be. The person making it is also the person whose life depends on being right, whose cover, whose physical safety, whose ability to walk out of this neighborhood alive is directly tied to the conclusion they reach. The incentive to underestimate the threat is enormous. The incentive to overestimate it is also enormous because overestimating it means extraction, and extraction means the operation ends. And the operation ending means something that Layla had not fully allowed herself to examine. It meant that the women in Khalil's circle would eventually be questioned, would be asked who had moved through their lives in recent years, would be asked about the woman from Tyre who came back from Germany, and Khalil, who had said that Layla was like a daughter to this family, would have to reconstruct every conversation and understand what it had been for. Layla assessed Abbas as a containable risk. She recommended continuation. Her handler approved it. What neither of them discussed, what the operational record from this period does not address, is whether that assessment was accurate or whether it was the assessment of someone who had been inside the legend long enough that walking away from it felt like a loss she couldn't quantify. The patch for the school discrepancy was deployed. It held. Abbas pulled back from the direct questioning. He became, over the following weeks, courteous rather than probing. He greeted her when he saw her. He stopped positioning himself at the edges of gatherings and watching. Layla reported this as resolution, as the risk receding. Her handler's response was 2 sentences. He wrote that the change in Abbas's behavior was consistent with either satisfied suspicion or redirected investigation, that these 2 things look identical from the inside. Layla read that response and understood, for the first time with real clarity, the nature of what she was doing. She was not operating inside a situation she could see clearly. She was operating inside a situation in which the most dangerous developments would be the ones that looked, from her position, like safety. And she had no way to know the difference. The coffee was still good on Thursday afternoons. Khalil still talked about the bakery that used to make the bread nobody makes anymore. The neighborhood still smelled of cardamom and old concrete. Nothing had changed. That was the problem. When everything looks the same, you cannot tell whether the danger has passed or whether it has simply learned to look like everything else. The operational shift came without announcement. That is how Layla would later describe it. Not a directive, not a formal escalation, but a change in the texture of what her handler was asking for. The questions coming back through the channel were becoming specific in a way they hadn't been before. Not neighborhood geography, not social mapping. Specific buildings, specific vehicles, specific patterns of movement for specific men. The operation had moved from access building to targeting. Nobody used that word in any communication she received, but she understood what the specificity meant. The map she had been building through 2 years of Thursday afternoons and funerals and borrowed children was being read by people she would never meet, in rooms she would never enter, for purposes she was not supposed to think too carefully about. She thought about them anyway. The first specific request came in month 19. Her handler asked her to confirm the regular movement pattern of a vehicle, a dark Kia, a specific partial plate, that was known to park in a lot 2 streets from Khalil's building on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. He asked her to confirm whether the pattern held across multiple weeks and whether the vehicle was ever accompanied by a second car. This required her to be physically present near that lot on Tuesday and Thursday evenings in a way that looked natural. In a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, being present somewhere requires a reason. Reasons require preparation. Preparation requires time she didn't signal for, which itself required explanation. She spent 4 days constructing the reason. A woman in Khalil's circle, a younger woman named Fatima, recently married, living 2 buildings past the lot, had mentioned she was struggling with a pregnancy. Layla began stopping by to check on her, Tuesdays and Thursdays, in the early evening, on the way back from nowhere in particular. Fatima was glad for the company. She talked constantly about her husband, her mother-in-law, her fear about the delivery. Layla listened and noted the vehicle and kept her eyes on Fatima's face the entire time so that anyone watching would see a woman visiting a pregnant friend, not a woman looking at a parking lot. She confirmed the pattern over 3 weeks. She confirmed the second vehicle. She sent the report. She did not ask what the report was for. The false start happened in month 21. Her handler sent a signal that indicated a phase shift, language in their communication protocol that meant a specific kind of operational readiness. She was to make herself available for an extraction window beginning in 72 hours. She was to begin natural disengagement. No abrupt absences, but a gradual reduction in her presence in the community, spread across the coming weeks to avoid creating a gap that would be noticed. She began it. She told Khalil that she had been dealing with a family matter, her mother, aging, in need of attention. She reduced her Thursday visits. She was present but less available. She let small invitations go unaccepted for the first time, apologetically, with explanations that were warm enough not to feel like withdrawal. 48 hours into this, the extraction window closed. No explanation came for 11 days. When the communication resumed, her handler told her the phase shift had been paused. Operational circumstances. She was to continue as before. She sat with that for a long time. Returning to full presence after a partial withdrawal is one of the most technically demanding things a deep cover operative can do. The community had registered her reduced availability. Khalil had not said anything, but she had given Layla a particular kind of look the last time they had spoken. Not suspicious, but aware. The look of a woman who has noticed a change and decided to wait and see what it means. Layla had to go back and be more present than she had been before the withdrawal. She had to make Khalil feel that the distance had been circumstantial, not personal. That required genuine warmth deployed with precision, which is its own kind of exhausting. She went back. She brought food. She stayed for 3 hours. She let Khalil's granddaughter fall asleep on her lap and did not move for 40 minutes because moving would have woken the child. Khalil watched her holding the sleeping child and said nothing, but the look was gone. The return had worked. Layla filed it as a risk absorbed. What she did not file, what she did not include in any report, was that during those 11 days of silence from her handler, she had thought about not going back at all. Not extraction, disappearance, the kind that operatives are not supposed to contemplate, the kind that the legend makes theoretically possible, because if the legend is good enough, it can be lived rather than exited. She had thought about it for 1 day. Then she had stopped thinking about it. She did not know, and still does not fully know, whether she stopped because she chose to or because the structure of what she had been trained to do reasserted itself without her permission. The incorrect assumption played out in month 22. Abbas had been quiet for months. The courteous distance he had maintained since the school question had settled into what felt like genuine indifference. He was present at family gatherings. He greeted her. He did not probe. Layla had assessed him as resolved. She had stopped allocating attention to him. She had made the decision, conscious, not passive, to treat him as a closed variable. She was wrong. She learned how wrong in a way that arrived quietly, the way the worst things do. She was at Khalil's apartment, helping prepare for a family dinner when she overheard, from the kitchen, Abbas speaking on the phone in the hallway. She was not meant to hear it. He had not checked where she was before he made the call. He was reading out a name to whoever was on the other end, a district in Tyre, a year. The name was not hers. The district was close to her legend's district, but not the same. The year was close to a year in her legend, but off by 2. He was checking a detail, running a verification. On someone, she could not tell immediately if it was her or a parallel check on another person in the community entirely. She kept cutting vegetables. She did not change the speed of the knife. She did not look toward the hallway. Khalil came back into the kitchen and asked her something about the onions, and Layla answered it correctly and felt the answer leave her mouth from a great distance. That night, she sent the elevated risk signal again. The near abort came 4 days later. Her handler's response included, for the first time in the operation, a direct question about whether she wanted to continue. Not framed as operational assessment, framed as a personal question. She had not been asked that before. The fact that she was being asked it now told her something about what her handler believed the Abbas situation represented. She thought about what she would leave behind if she exited now. The vehicle pattern, the building access she had been weeks away from confirming, the specific intelligence on 3 locations that had taken 18 months to get proximity to. She thought about what she would leave behind in the other sense. Khalil, Fatima, 8 months pregnant now, who had told Layla 2 weeks ago that she wanted her present at the birth if it was possible. She told her handler she was continuing. He sent back one line. He said that the Abbas check appeared to have been on a different individual, a new woman who had recently joined a neighboring community group, and that there was no current evidence it was directed at Layla. This was the false release moment, the information that the danger had passed, that Abbas was looking elsewhere, that the variable she had reopened was already closed again. She felt the relief arrive and then, almost immediately, noticed the relief. Examined it. The relief was too clean, too complete, the kind that comes when you have been frightened and are told the fear was unnecessary. She had learned, by month 22, to distrust that feeling specifically, because the operation had taught her one thing above everything else: the moments that feel like safety, and the moments that are safety do not arrive with different textures. They feel identical, and you are never, from inside the legend, in a position to know which one you are living in. The extraction did not happen the way Layla had been told it would. The operational plan had described a clean exit, a gradual managed withdrawal over 6 to 8 weeks, paced carefully enough that her disappearance would read as life circumstances rather than flight. A sick mother, a family obligation, the kind of departure that leaves no shape, no outline, no reason for anyone to look harder at the space she had occupied. What happened instead was compressed. A signal came through the elevated channel on a Tuesday night telling her the window had moved. Not weeks, days. She had 48 hours to complete her presence in the community, settle anything that needed settling, and be gone in a way that would not alarm anyone until it was too late to matter. The reason for the compression was not explained to her then. It was explained later, partially, in a debrief she has described as the most disorienting conversation of her adult life. What she was told, stripped of the language the debrief used, was this: a separate Mossad asset embedded higher in Hezbollah's administrative structure had flagged that Abbas's investigation, the one her handler had told her was directed at a different woman, had not, in fact, been closed. It had been redirected, away from the obvious, quieted deliberately so that the subject of it would relax. Abbas had not been looking elsewhere. He had been waiting for her to stop watching him. This is where the earlier decisions began to cost. Layla had assessed Abbas as a containable risk in month 5 and recommended continuation. That assessment had been made, as she acknowledged in the debrief, in a state that was not purely analytical. She had been inside the legend long enough that the legend had weight. Ending the operation had stopped feeling like a professional decision and had started feeling like a personal loss. She had named that honestly in the debrief, and the honesty had not made anyone in the room more comfortable. The consequence of continuing past month 5 was not that the operation failed. It succeeded. The intelligence produced in months 6 through 22 was, by the account of the people in the position to assess it, significant. Locations confirmed. Movement patterns established. Infrastructure mapped. But the consequence of continuing was also this: the compressed extraction meant that Layla's disappearance landed on the community as a sudden absence rather than a managed departure. Khalil noticed within days. The woman who had been like a daughter had simply ceased to exist. No forwarding address, no final visit, no explanation that made sense. Khalil asked questions. Of course she did. She asked the other women in the circle. She asked Fatima, who had delivered her child, a girl, 8 days before Layla disappeared, and who had been expecting Layla to be there and then wasn't. She asked Abbas. Abbas knew what her disappearance meant before his mother did. That knowledge, and the conversation between a son and his mother that followed it, is something Layla was briefed on secondhand through the intelligence network that remained active in the community after her extraction. She was told the broad shape of it, not the details. She has said she is grateful not to have the details. The strategic fallout began before the operation officially concluded. Inside Hezbollah's administrative and counterintelligence structure, the confirmation that a penetration had occurred, not suspected, confirmed, triggered the kind of internal audit that organizations with tight compartmentalization both require and dread. Because the audit is not targeted, it cannot be. When you know you have been penetrated but you don't know the full extent, you audit everything. Every relationship that developed over the past 3 years, every piece of information that passed through social channels, every woman in Khalil's circle who had been present at gatherings where anything operational was mentioned, however obliquely. Women who had done nothing. Women who had said nothing that they understood as intelligence. Women who had talked about their lives the way people talk about their lives, and who now found themselves being asked, in various degrees of formality, to account for what they had said and to whom. This is the damage that does not appear in operational assessments. It has no column in any report. The intelligence services that commissioned the operation have no mechanism for counting it, and limited incentive to try. What it produced, inside that community, was something that intelligence professionals sometimes call secondary corrosion. The audit didn't find other operatives. There were none to find at that level. What it found, instead, was that the people it questioned began to trust each other differently afterward. Women who had shared meals for 20 years found themselves remembering those meals with a new kind of attention, asking themselves what they had said, whether they had been careful enough, whether the person across the table had been listening in the wrong way. Khalil's circle contracted, not immediately, gradually, the way any social structure contracts when it has been made aware of its own permeability. The personal cost arrived in 2 forms and at different speeds. The first was immediate and practical. The cover name Layla had used, the legend's full architecture, the supporting identity documentation, all of it was burned. This is standard. What is less standard is what it costs when the burned identity has been inhabited for over 2 years. Operatives who have maintained deep cover for extended periods describe a specific phenomenon. The legend doesn't disappear when the operation ends. It persists. The habits it required, the linguistic patterns, the behavioral adjustments, the particular posture of grief that had been built around a brother who never existed, these do not dissolve on the flight home. Layla did not speak for the first 2 days after extraction, not because she was instructed not to, because she found that the words available to her in her actual life felt temporarily less natural than the ones she had been using for 2 years. This passes, the psychologists in the debrief told her. Mostly. The second form of personal cost was slower, and has no clean endpoint. Fatima named her daughter a name that, transliterated, means something close to trust. Layla was told this through the same secondary channel that briefed her on Khalil's questions. She does not know whether she was told it as information or as something else. She has not been able to determine how to carry it. It is not guilt in any simple sense because the word guilt implies that a different choice was available and wasn't made. The choices were made with the information and the capacity available at the time. The debrief confirmed this. The institutional record reflects this. It doesn't change what the name means. The broader strategic consequences are the kind that take years to assess and are still, as of this documentary, unfolding. The intelligence gathered through operations like this one contributed to a targeting architecture that Israeli forces drew on extensively in 2024. The New York Times investigation, published in December of that year, based on more than 24 current and former officials, described Mossad's penetration of Hezbollah as decades in the making, and socially rooted in a way that satellite and signals intelligence could not replicate. It described human sources embedded inside the community. It described the intimate domestic nature of the access. It described, without naming anyone, exactly the kind of operation this documentary has traced. What the investigation also noted is that the penetration, once understood by Hezbollah's remaining leadership, accelerated the organization's internal collapse of trust in ways that outlasted the military campaign. Organizations that discover they have been watched from inside their own homes do not recover quickly. The question is not just who was working against us, it is who knew, who might have known, who might still know. That question, once asked, does not have a satisfying answer. It just keeps being asked. Layla left the operational service within a year of extraction. The circumstances of that departure are not part of the public record and will not be detailed here. What she said, in the one account relayed through an intermediary that has informed this documentary, was not about the operation's success or failure. It was not about what the intelligence produced or what it was used for. She said that the thing she thinks about is Khalil's apartment. The photographs on the wall, the man in the frame with the black ribbon, the smell of cardamom, the bread from the bakery that nobody makes anymore. She said she thinks about it the way you think about a place you grew up in and cannot go back to, which is not a metaphor. It is, with some precision, exactly what it is. If there is a lesson in operations like this one, it is not about intelligence methodology or operational tradecraft. Those are documented elsewhere in language designed to make them learnable. The lesson, if there is one, is simpler and harder. That the most effective deception is not one that defeats an enemy's suspicion. It is one that earns a community's love. And that those two things in this kind of work are not different operations. They are the same one.